Welcome, listeners, to a realm where shadows dance and whispers echo. I'm your host, Rick Clifton, and this is Quills and Chills, the podcast that brings you face to face with the masterminds behind the macabre. In each episode, we journey into the minds of horror writers and filmmakers to uncover the secrets lurking within their tales of terror. From classic tales to modern nightmares, we'll traverse the corridors of the human psyche and unravel the threads of dread that keep us turning the pages or sitting out there in the dark. Welcome to Quills and Chills. Hello and welcome back to Quills and Chills. I'm your host, Rick Clifton, and today I have the absolute pleasure of welcoming Delle Sandeen to the show. Delle is a talented writer from Northeast Florida who's made a name for herself in the world of speculative fiction with work featured in Faya, which is a magazine of Black speculative fiction, the Nightlight podcast, and Gay Magazine. Now she's here to talk with me about her debut novel that I loved so much, This Cursed House. So welcome to the show, Delle.
Thank you, Rick. Hi, everybody.
Before we get into the specifics of This Cursed House, I would love to just get to know you a little bit. So tell us a little bit about yourself, where you grew up, what you're doing.
Okay. I was born in South Korea because my dad was in the U.S. Air Force, and that's where he was stationed. You know, he met my mom. So actually, I was there for about almost 3 years. So Korean is actually my first language.
Wow.
And yeah, we came to the States when I was about 3 years old. And what happened was my parents went back to Korea, and I was here with my grandparents, my dad's family. So all the Korean was gone because no one was here, to speak it to me. And I had to, learn English. And we grew up. Honestly, I didn't move around as much as, some military kids. And I grew up an only child. So yes, I was a military brat. Yeah. But I've been in Florida, somewhere in Florida ever since I was 3. And I think that part of what made me, I've always been a big reader. And like I said, I kind of went from Judy Blume straight into Stephen King, which seems like a strange jump.
Nope, not at all. I can relate.
That's how it was. And yeah, when I was about 10 years old, that was when I said, because I read so much, I was like, okay, I want to write books, but 10-year-old me, I don't know anything about, I don't even, really recognize the fact that there's nonfiction books and there's different kind of books. All I'm thinking is novels. I want to write like Judy Blume. That was it. So, and one thing that my dad and I did every Saturday was watch this show called Creature Feature. And it was, they showed horror movies, like the old horror movies, like it's a bunch of Hammer horror, a lot of Vincent Price. And that's what we did every Saturday. And I think that was what made me just really love, scary movies. But then sometimes I thought back on it and, I was probably like 6 or 7, maybe 8. And I'm like, where was my mom when me and my dad were sitting here watching these scary movies that sometimes are giving me nightmares? So, but yeah, that's basically it. So
That's so funny. As a kid, for me, it was Shock Theater on Saturday nights, and I wasn't allowed to stay up. My brother, who is 5 years older, and his friends would be over, and they would stay up to watch it, and I wasn't allowed to. And I would sneak into the hallway outside of the living room and just kind of would peek through the door. And like you, I used to just get like terrified and have nightmares, but I wouldn't stop. And I think that's sort of what led me to horror as well. So
okay.
what's your writing process like? Are you someone that sort of just dives in and goes for it, or do you like to process and plan a little bit, or are you a little bit of both? I know in your opening the book, I don't know, is the note to the reader, is that also in the print copy? I have an ARC, so
I don't believe it is. And there's a different note in the book club. The book club copies, slightly different, but in the hard, the final copy, I don't believe that reader's note is there.
Got it. Well, if you want to talk about that a little bit, I love the way the story came to you and how you started it. So I really would love to hear about that.
Okay, sure thing.
I mean, there's so much I love about this book, and we'll get to that. But This was like right off the bat was just like, oh, now I'm really interested. So you had me hooked from go.
Okay, thank you. I will say I do work from an outline. The very first manuscript that I finished, I did not have an outline, and it shows. And that's why that manuscript is sitting in a trunk right now. But it's a pretty loose outline because I'm I'm usually pretty surprised by what happens once I sit down and start writing. Like I'll have an idea in my head, and I'm usually very good about knowing what's going to be in a scene, but as far as dialogue, and that very often surprises me because I might have a line or two that I want the characters to say, but once I get going, then something will come up, from another character, and it's like, wow, I wasn't even expecting that. I didn't even know this was going to happen.
That's my favorite part, right? When
Yes,
it just
it
comes out of
is.
nowhere.
Exactly. And especially when you love it, it's like, okay, this is good.
Mm-hmm.
But I think part of the inspiration for the book came from one of my absolute favorite films, Eve's Bayou, because it's set. And the thing was, when I first had the idea for the book, I wasn't sure I knew I wanted it to be set definitely in the South. I don't know if New Orleans, like if that was a firm choice, but definitely somewhere in the South because that's where, that's what I'm most familiar with. But I didn't know if I was going to set it in the present day or not. So when I did decide to set it, in the past, because I love Eve's Bayou so much, I was like, well, why don't we just set it in the same city in the same time period, the early 60s. So this is kind of my, my love letter, to Eve's Bayou. And the other inspiration was, as I mentioned in that reader's note, my paternal grandmother. She, grew up in the segregated South. She's a Black woman, and because she was, brown skinned, she was, pretty dark. She unfortunately had a teacher at school who, like the Duchons in the book, her teacher was very light skinned, and she favored the light skinned girls in the class. So when it came time for the girls in the class to learn how to use a sewing machine, which was something my grandmother really wanted to do, because it was, a rural school out in the country, they didn't have enough sewing machines for everyone. So the girls were supposed to take turns. And what happened was the teacher only let the girls who were light like her use the sewing machines. So instead of everyone getting a turn, just the light skinned girls were allowed to use the machines. The dark skinned girls, like my grandmother, just had to sit by and watch. And so that was something that she really wanted to do, and she never got the chance, to do it because, once she was out of school, she got married, started having children, she was raising a family, she was working. So she just never got back to that. And the colorism aspect, just people discriminating against other people, sometimes like within their own racial group, based on just the color of their skin, that also had a big influence, on the book and the characters and the story.
I love the way that you tackled that and handled that in this story as well.
Thank you.
So I'm excited to talk about it. Last question before we dive in, just because this is always my favorite question. I want to know, what's your favorite scary story from childhood?
Oh my gosh, probably something from Edgar Allan Poe, because I think, I was reading a lot of Poe, when I was younger, and The Telltale Heart was one that always stuck with me because it was just so creepy, and it was terrifying, but so good.
Have you seen The Fall of the House of Usher on Netflix, the new Mike Flanagan, or the latest Mike Flanagan? I highly recommend it. It is like, I was riveted. So
okay, great.
and if you're an Edgar Allan Poe fan, I think you'll love that. So.
Okay.
All right. Well, let's talk about this book. I'm dying to dive in. So,
great.
I know you've talked a little bit about it already, but what drew you to set the story in 1960s New Orleans, and how did this time period help shape both the characters and the narrative? And I know you touched on that a little bit, but
yes. In addition to the Eve's Bayou influence, one of the other reasons that I chose 1962, 1963 was because I thought there would be more obstacles in Gemma, the main character's, path that way, because on top of the colorism, then she also has to deal with the racism, coming from Chicago down to New Orleans. The environment was different. I'm not going to say that racism did not exist in the North, but it wasn't as obvious and in your face as it was in the South, because as she's traveling further south, they put the color sign, in the train car, and she has to deal with all of the Jim Crow isms, as she comes to the South. And yeah, that was, like I said, just putting some more obstacles in her path. Also, just for me, well, I mean, I'm sure the people who were living during that era, maybe they don't feel it was simpler, but that was another thing. Like, I think sometimes if you set a story in today, especially if it's a mystery or a thriller, someone can just easily pick up a phone or Google and find the answer that they want. But, back then they didn't have those resources. So just to make it a little bit more difficult.
Got it. So, well, Gemma is certainly fleeing both her life and also a very unique ability. And I don't think it's a spoiler because one of the things I love about this book is that you get to the supernatural like right away.
Yes.
And it's just like, and it's just always there. And that doesn't happen. I read a few books. It
Okay.
doesn't always happen in every book. So I loved it. It was another reason why this book is top of the list for me is that you get to the supernatural right away. So, so getting to my point,
Okay.
I would love to know what sort of inspired you to explore her connection with the supernatural and how that journey reflects on the larger themes of the novel, obviously without spoilers as much as we can.
Okay. I think it was important for me that she, obviously because Gemma should change from the beginning of the book, to the end of the book. And so I didn't want her to embrace that ability right off because, and I don't think this is giving anything away either, but Gemma has some issues with accepting herself as she is. Obviously, once the readers, read the story, they'll know why, she has these issues. But it was important for me just to show her as she evolves and changes, her feelings toward her ability to see spirits changes along with that. And as she accepts, or grows to accept that ability more, that has a big impact on how she's able to help not only the Duchons but also herself.
Right. The Duchon family. We got to talk about them.
Yes.
They have a very complex dynamic, the Duchon family. And that includes, as what you said about colorism and class. And I would love to have you talk a little bit about how you approach these themes in the story, especially within the context of a cursed family.
Okay. I was going to say, I think once people, once they're familiar with the story, they can see that the Duchons are cursed in more way than one. And part of that curse is just how they view themselves and how they view other people, especially people who are not, white presenting, or light skinned as they are. And that, in terms of like generational curses or generational trauma, they are definitely a family, that's suffering from that. And so the way that, they view Gemma and treat her, right off the bat, it has a big impact, on that, because I'm trying to think
I know,
without giving away too much.
As I was writing the questions, I was the same way. I was like, okay, I got to be careful because I don't want to give anything away. So there's a lot of secrets. Let me tell you, folks, there's a lot of secrets, and I love it. So.
Yes. So but the thing is, I think as strange as the Duchons are, I didn't want to write them to be just all across the board horrible, because I still want the reader to, even if they can't, quite sympathize with them, they can see that they're not all bad, or they're not all, there is a complexity to them. So they're not, you shouldn't just hate them, 100% without also trying to see, well, this is why they're the way they are. It's a generational thing. Not to say that, people should just excuse totally bad behavior, but I think a lot of times when a character or villain is the way they are, there's a reason for it if you can, dig into the background.
And I think there's a lot that, for me, that I understood about these characters. I wouldn't say that for every single one I empathized and related to in any way, but there was things I certainly understood. And I think you did a wonderful job with having that come across on the page, because I definitely saw those complexities for sure.
Thank you.
So speaking of that, Gemma's relationship with the Deschamps family certainly evolves throughout the novel. This is going to be a hard one.
Okay. Yes.
uh, a hard one just in terms of spoilers, but I was wondering if you could
Mhm.
talk about how her perception of them shifts as she uncovers their secrets, and maybe we do it in a very sort of
Okay.
generational
Okay,
arc.
sure.
So,
Yeah, I was going to say one of the, and I know this is apparent, early on, she's very charmed by them. She's very, entranced by them because, their family unit is something that she didn't have growing up. And, they're, outwardly, they're very beautiful people. And I think sometimes it's easy to fall under the spell, of people who we find beautiful, or attractive. And as she gets to know them and she uncovers, more of their secrets, and, they treat her the way that they're treating her, her relationship with them, definitely changes. Granted, she has, there are, several family members, and she does have, she interacts with each of them in a different way, as you know.
mhm.
And some of them she gets along with better than others. But and I think it's just, I think it's her, as her, feelings toward each of them changes. I think it's similar to how we meet people in our real life. Like, we may have a
Right.
perception of them, a first impression, but as we get to know them better, our impression of them can change, sometimes for the better, sometimes for the worse. So yeah.
So the curse itself plays a very central role, I think, in the plot. So I'd love to know how you sort of conceptualize the curse itself and sort of talk a little bit about what it symbolizes both for the family and for Gemma.
Okay. When the idea first came to me, all I knew is that I was writing about a cursed family. That was it. And I guess the parameters of the curse, it didn't take me long, to hammer that out. As far as, because the Duchamps are living under this curse, it's made them very, and I guess this would be true for anybody, who's cursed in a certain way, and especially when it's a very bad curse, it's made them, I was going to say, just kind of not very nice, especially to Gemma. And for Gemma, I guess in terms of the curse, once she realizes that her fate is tied into theirs, she has to figure out how to break the curse. But there are definitely moments where, because of, how they have treated her, where she's wondering, you know, if she even wants to do it, why she wants to do it. And so she really has to examine, but why am I helping these people? Do I even want to be helping these people? But again, because her fate is tied into theirs, she does also have to consider herself.
I will say, as a side note, I was feeling that most of the way through the story. You're like, don't help these people. Like,
Right.
but I get, by the time we got to the end, I totally understood why. So as long
Yes.
as, I mean, all I can say, I'll say it over and over and over again through this entire conversation. There's a surprise on almost every single page, and I just absolutely love that so much, Dale. It's just
Thank
really just like every time I would turn a chapter, it was like, oh my God, one more thing. It's really, really great. So
you.
that's why it's hard to talk about without
Mhm.
spoilers. But I would change the thing because
Okay.
I'd rather have an interview here that is shrouded in ambiguity versus changing anything about this book because it was
Okay.
great. So Gemma's ability to see spirits is something that we've talked about. She's always tried to escape,
Mhm.
but it like we talked about, it becomes crucial in her role with the Deschamps family. I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about her internal struggle with it and how it has driven her decisions up to this point.
Okay. Gemma, one of the reasons, well, the reason Gemma suppresses her ability is because of how her parents treated her. They did not want her seeing ghosts, so they made her suppress that. And I think tied into that, closely related to that, because Gemma has always run from that ability, she's run from other things as well. And that's one of the reasons she finds herself, moving from Chicago down to New Orleans. She's very, she's very familiar with running away from things as opposed to, facing them head on. And, like I said, as she changes, over the course of the story, she has to learn how running has affected her. And I mean, I can equate this, to like real life, just people in real life in general. I think, when people run from their problems instead of facing them, as Gemma has done, it, can lead to more problems. So I don't know if, Gemma getting the job offer in New Orleans was like her rock bottom, but sometimes people have to get to that point. They have to get to a point where they absolutely cannot run away anymore if they're going to solve like whatever the issue is.
And we'll have to talk about the ending of that book and where she ends up in all of this once this is no longer recording, because
Okay.
I love that last chapter. My God. So this cursed house is steeped in all the atmospheric qualities of Southern Gothic. It's a genre known for its exploration of certain themes like politics, racism, religion. And this novel weaves in all the elements of Black heritage, of magic, and survival. I would love if you could talk a little bit about why you feel it's important that you include and highlight these aspects within the Southern Gothic genre.
Okay. I think first of all, Southern Gothic is a genre that I absolutely love. And historically, the earliest Southern Gothic writers, they were almost exclusively white and men. It's Tennessee Williams, William Faulkner, Flannery O'Connor, it's a woman, but they were almost exclusively white. And when there were Black characters in those Southern Gothic, stories, they were, a side character. And I think it's very difficult for white writers, especially if they're coming from a very privileged place, to understand the Black experience. So it's not always easy to write a Black character, from that angle. And I'm not saying that white writers should not write Black characters, but it is important to be as, I think, informed as possible to make it realistic. So in terms of, it was important to me to, like I said, I love Southern Gothic, and just being able to write a story told from like Black characters' point of view, especially covering the colorism aspect, because I've talked to some people since, and they really were not very aware, that was an issue, in the African American community, and, weren't aware of why it even exists. So just being able to explore that, and, if that can spark a conversation for some people, especially people who are completely unfamiliar with it, I'm happy to do that, simply because I do think it's a topic, that people should discuss, because again, that ties into, not running away from, a problem, because, colorism, even though this cursed house is set back in the early 60s, colorism is an issue that is still going on today, just like racism. It might not look the same, but it is still around. So and just also just being able to be a BIPOC writer, in traditional publishing. And it's important to me just to have diverse stories out there written from diverse perspectives, especially living in Florida, which is, I think we're still leading the nation in the number of challenged books. And it's been, just really difficult and hard, especially for school kids, because I had this discussion with someone who said, well, kids, they can read books at home. And it's like, well, everyone doesn't have access to that. Like everyone's parents or family are not taking them to the library or the bookstore, or they can't afford to buy books. Sometimes the kids' only, exposure to books is at school. Mm-hmm. So yeah, just being able to add, a diverse perspective, about these issues. I'm happy, to be, included in this.
Well, I thank you for it. As someone who grew up in the South, I grew up in North Carolina. I certainly saw my fair share of racism, but as far as colorism goes, I knew it existed, but I don't know that I knew growing up as a kid what it was, but I certainly saw that as well. And, in the past few years, I don't know, 10 years or so, I really learned a lot more about it. And I love seeing it in the stories that you've written here. And I love that you're writing in Southern Gothic.
Thank you.
And it's exactly what you said. It's like in the early days of Southern Gothic stories, it was always like privileged white men that wrote these stories. And now it's very nice to, I can't even tell you how many stories I've had now that have been written by people of color. And I love it. So
yes, thank you.
So thank you for writing in this genre, and thank you for all of that. So what for you is the most challenging aspect of writing this book, and what are you hoping that the readers will take away from it in Jemma's story?
I'll start with that second part of your question first. I just hope that I hope that they're entertained, scared a little bit. Thank you, but also educated. Yeah, and
we are. So
okay.
mission accomplished.
Okay, great. And anybody, like, if they, I don't know, if they can see a little of themselves in Jemma or another character, and if it helps them, I don't know, develop, some aspect of themselves they wanted to develop, that's perfect. So I think the most difficult part of writing the book, I know at one point the curse was a little more complicated, and so with my agent's help and my editor's help, I was able to, simplify that a little bit, because I don't ever want to write something that's so convoluted and complicated that someone has to like whip out a calculator, and do some algebra to figure things out, because I'm not a math person anyway. So that was difficult. But, like I said, with their help, I was able to, get it into better shape.
Well, it works. So I loved it. And well, it actually leads into my next question. So without giving away anything, what do you feel like is the most pivotal moment or scene from the book that readers should look forward to? Now, before you answer that,
okay,
I have mine. The problem is, when I was thinking about this question and putting it together, I was like, there's so many. Which one do I choose?
Okay.
And I think this is the way to phrase this. For me, probably the most profound was when Jemma finds out what happened to her mother. I'll just leave it at that. But
okay.
But
I was gonna say, that's what I was gonna say. And I was gonna say, I think I can say seance without giving anything away. So yes, definitely the seance. And I think what I loved about the seance, and someone also asked me recently what my favorite scene was. And I mentioned another scene, and I can also mention this one, the party scene, simply because I think anytime you say the words seance or party, anything can happen. And you just don't know. It can go any way at all. So, and I think that was one of the reasons I liked writing the party scene. But same with the seance. It's like you never know.
Yep, I loved it. It was great, the seance. But the seance is also sort of, I think for me, really where it all, I gotta shut up. But we'll talk after.
Okay.
All right. But all right. So I love this book. Please tell me there's another one coming. What's next on the horizon for you?
I am working on another horror story right now. And thank you. And I will say it's more Haunting of Hill House, in vibe. So yes, but that's what I'm working on right now.
I love it. I love it. I love it. All right. This book is called This Cursed House. It's available everywhere on October 8th. And as we always like to say here at Quills and Chills, please support your local bookstores whenever possible. Dale, how can our audience find you on social media?
The only social media that I really have the mental bandwidth for is Twitter. And I am on Twitter at Delle Sandeen.
I will include that on the show notes and also on screen as well. So Dale, thank you so much for coming out here and talking to me today. I appreciate you being on the show. And again, this book, I could just go on. And we're going to as soon as we stop recording.
Thank you so much, Rick. I love being here.
All right, you guys. We'll see you next time on Quills and Chills. Thanks for joining me on another episode of Quills and Chills. I hope you enjoyed our deep dive into the mysterious and the haunted. If you're enjoying the show, don't forget to support us by subscribing on your preferred podcast platform and leaving us a rating or review, because your feedback helps keep those chills running down both our spines. And feel free to share the show with your favorite fellow horror enthusiasts. Also, if you guys have any spooky stories, strange encounters, or paranormal experiences of your own, I'd love to hear them. Reach out to me on social media or email me at quillsandchillspodcast@gmail.com. Who knows? Your story might end up on a very special episode. Anyway, thanks for listening, and I will see you back here next time on Quills and Chills. Bye, y'all.